Well, welcome to the next episode of our series looking at Scotland's Reformation and the key figures in it. Now, we ended the last one with the martyrdom of Patrick Hamilton in 1528. Sadly, he was just the first of many, and others would be martyred for their faith, like Henry Forrest, a man who said that Patrick Hamilton was a good man and that the things he was saying were true. Two men, David Straighton and Norman Gourlay, were both martyred 1534 for their faith. 5 men, all murdered at the same time in 1538 at Castle Hill in Edinburgh. And there's others that we can speak about as well. But we're going to look at the next main character that God raised up to carry on the work of Reformation in Scotland, and that's a man called George Wishart. George Wishart was born around about 1513 into the Wisharts of Pitterrow, who were a landowning family from Aberdeenshire. As a young man, he went over to the continent to study at the university there, and was converted, came under the influence of reformers like Luther and Zwingli, and was converted. He comes back to Scotland, begins teaching. In 1538, he gets himself in trouble for teaching the Greek New Testament, which was regarded as heresy in the eyes of the Catholic Church. He is asked to appear before the authorities, but he doesn't go. He leaves, goes first of all down to Bristol, briefly, then over to the continent, to Germany, then to Switzerland. In Switzerland, he becomes a real admirer of the Helvetic Confession, which is the confession of faith of the Reformed churches in Switzerland. And he admires it so much that he translates it into his own native language. His time in Switzerland is a real time of maturity and growing in his faith and in his knowledge of the scriptures. 1543, he leaves Switzerland, comes to Cambridge, where he begins to not only preach, but also to teach and be a student at the university there. But in Cambridge, he becomes known for his charity and his love and his care for his fellow man, known for giving away his clothing, his bedding, his food to the poor. So he had a real care, not only for the spiritual needs of the people by taking the gospel to them, but also for the material needs as well, and was a real example of Christ with regards to that. 1544, however, he knows he has to take the gospel back to Scotland, and he does that. He comes to Scotland, preaches first in Montrose, and then goes down to Dundee, where he preaches to even larger crowds. The Catholic Church find out about it and send a man called Robert Mill to go and basically chase him out the city, and he tells him to leave Dundee and not to trouble the people anymore. George Wishart says that he had no desire to trouble anyone, but that the chasing away of God's word and God's messenger is not going to stop trouble, but is actually going to bring trouble. However, he does leave reluctantly and makes his way to the west of Scotland, where he's very well received by the locals there. He begins preaching down in Ayrshire, but Bishop Dunbar of Glasgow finds out about it, and he goes down to try and stop him. Him and some of his men go inside the church at Ayr, stop George Wishart getting inside there to preach. George Wishart simply just turns round and preaches at the Market Cross in that town, and large groups come to hear him preach. A similar thing happens at Mauchline, nearby. He goes there to preach, but the local church is filled with the henchmen of Bishop Dunbar, and they can't go in. But George Wishart's got quite a big following with him now, and they're quite happy to take the church by force if he wants them to. But he says no, he says there won't be any bloodshed, and he just simply takes the people to the outskirts of Mauchline and preaches to a very large number in one of the fields nearby. He spends the next wee while round about that area just preaching the gospel when he finds out that there's a plague in Dundee. So he leaves the south of Scotland, the west of Scotland, and makes his way up to Dundee because he's got a real association with the people there. When he's in the city, he's standing on the city walls preaching to the sick with the plague outside and to the healthy who are inside the city. Coming down off the city walls one day, a man runs at him with a dagger, a man called John Whiteman, who was an assassin for the Roman Catholic Church. George Wishart sees this, grabs Whiteman's wrist, shakes the dagger loose and manages to stop him. Now the crowd at this point want to kill John Wightman, but George Wishart stops him and just speaks very gently to John Wightman, asking him, why he wanted to kill him and what had George Wishart ever done to him. He should think about those who sent him to kill him. And the man breaks down and he actually saves the life from the mob of that man who was about to take his. After a little while, the plague dies down in Dundee and he goes to Montrose and preaches there. Whilst he's in Montrose, he receives a letter which comes from a friend saying that he was sick and he wished that George Wishart could come and see him. So he gets ready, leaves Montrose, but he just leaves the town when he gets this feeling that something's just not quite right. He senses danger ahead, and he was actually right in what he was thinking, because the letter was a forgery and it was a trap. Some of his friends went on ahead to just have a little look and see what it was, and they found 60 men lying in wait. Now the man who had sent those 60 men was Cardinal David Beaton. Cardinal David Beaton took over from his uncle, Archbishop James Beaton, upon his death in 1539. And Cardinal David Beaton was just as zealous in his persecution of the Protestants in Scotland as his uncle was. A man known to have lived a totally ungodly life, a very lavish lifestyle, and gave little attention to the people in Scotland. When George Wishart found out that it was Beaton who had sent him, he was known to remark that he knew that one day he will die at the hands of that bloodthirsty man, but not in this manner. So he managed to avoid that assassination attempt. He makes his way down to Edinburgh to preach the gospel. He's expecting some of his friends, a large number of his friends from the southwest of Scotland and from Ayrshire, to come and join with him. But they don't come. They're frightened. They keep their heads down. And he himself has to lay low. He's unsure what to do, and he's really down, and he feels alone and abandoned, and he can just sense that his time is running short. However, he continues to go out and preach in East Lothian, places like Tranent, Musselburgh, Haddington, Leith. But the numbers are not huge. He's not getting huge numbers. But he's not entirely alone, because by this point a man has befriended him and has become his companion and bodyguard, carrying a two-handed sword, and that man is John Knox. Now, George Wishart would have a huge impact on John Knox's life. But as he was travelling round, they went to Haddington to preach. And as George Wishart went up into the pulpit of that church in Haddington, with John Knox standing at the bottom with his sword for protection, when George Wishart looked out and saw just a few brave souls, it really hurt him, and he felt that the people were just tired and weary of hearing God's word. So after the sermon, he comes out the church and says to John Knox that he can't come any further with him. He knows his time's almost up. John Knox wants to go with him, but George Wishart says, no, one person's enough for one sacrifice. You go back to your bairns, which means your children. John Knox had originally been, previous to this, had been a personal tutor to a family at Langnidry. So he just went back to doing that. And so they parted outside that church, Wishart and Knox. They would never see each other again. Knox goes back to his old job. Wishart and some other friends go to Ormiston House, and whilst he's at Ormiston House, that very same night at midnight, a large group of men come and arrest him under the leadership of the Earl of Bothwell. He's arrested, taken to Edinburgh Castle, held there briefly, and then summoned up to St Andrews to stand trial. He's kept in the bottle dungeon of St Andrews Castle, and on the 27th of February 1546, he's taken out and put on trial for heresy. He's found guilty. The date of his execution is set for the 1st of March 1546. And on that morning, the stake is put in the ground just outside St Andrews Castle, within viewpoint of the personal and private apartments of Cardinal David Beaton, who is sitting at the window watching George Wishart's execution. As the flames are lit and bags of gunpowder are put round about him, they're ignited and they cause an explosion. But it doesn't kill him. His last words were, "This flame occasions trouble to my body indeed, but it hath in no wise broken my spirit. But he who now so proudly looks down upon me from yonder lofty place shall ere long be as ignominiously thrown down as now he proudly lolls at his ease." And he's speaking about what Cardinal Beaton watching him from his window. And that was his last words. With that, a rope was put round his neck and he was strangled, and the flames took hold and he was executed. George Wishart's execution, as we'll see in the next episodes, would have a big impact on the Reformation in Scotland. And his impact on John Knox would be no small thing either. But one of the most important things about George Wishart in his life was the preaching of the word. He knew how important Scotland needed Reformation, and how that Reformation could only be brought about by the preaching of the gospel. And just as Scotland needed it, the preaching then, Scotland needs the preaching now. So that's George Wishart, and as we'll see later on, just how big his death was and what an impact it had upon Scotland. George Wishart, 1st of March 1546. So thank you again for watching, and please look out for other episodes coming soon. We will start looking next at how the Reformation moves forward and how John Knox had a big part to play in that and came to the forefront of Scotland's Reformation. So thank you.